Some people have been saying, I'm not really sure how to think about planting in these times where we can't actually visit a campus anymore and students aren't there and everybody's sheltered in place. Should we even be trying to plant ministries right now when that's the case? And a lot of people are feeling like we're just trying to take care of the people that we currently have and try to keep them connected to each other and to Jesus. And so we're trying to just keep our small groups going and keep our leaders moving forward with their people. So it's hard to wrap my mind around planting new ministry in it for that reason too. So that's why today we're talking about planting without a campus. And our team, the planting team, has had a lot of conversations about this because we've been asking the same questions ourselves, and we've been just thinking like, even though the means for us connecting with people has been in some ways, changed and limited to only online, that doesn't mean that our calling from Jesus and our authority that Jesus has given us to reach people in his name has changed. So it's like our sentness by Jesus is still real, and it hasn't changed a bit, even though the circumstances we're currently in has changed a lot. But we can, obviously, we know we can still connect with people. And really, when it boils down to it, our ministry has always been about people. It's never been about real estate. It's never been about a campus geography. So we've always been sent to minister to people. And since we can still connect online, then our ministry still exists. And another thing we've been talking about is the fact that anytime a student or staff or faculty, any of us starts a community around Jesus, whether it's more evangelistic and we're just exploring who is Jesus for the first time, or whether it's more we're going deeper in our faith, no matter what that focus is, anytime we start something and gather people around our faith in Jesus, we are planting something. And so there are a lot of new expressions of what people are starting and how people are engaging people around Jesus and faith questions. But to us, it all still seems like planting. So in that sense, it's very possible. And we don't have the geographic boundaries anymore. And we're not thinking strictly around a single campus. And maybe there's some advantages to that. Maybe the fact that we don't have physical campuses that we're limited by, and that our social networks online go way beyond those, and also include even family members and people we work with. All those boundaries are now blurred, and maybe that's something God wants to work through. And maybe that's something, God is already really showing us he can work through in ways that we haven't been used to before. And that's just a beautiful thing. So the first answer is yes, we can plant, even though we don't have campuses that we're necessarily visiting and meeting at. And so today what we want to do is think about a framework that we've been using for years now. We call it the 4E framework, and it has basically 4 concepts, and that is encounter and explore and empower and establish communal rhythms. And so those 4 E's we're gonna share, and then talk about what does that look like in our current life, our current reality of online ministry. Okay, so with that intro, I'm gonna pass this over to Eric. And Eric, would you kind of give us an overview of those 4 E's?
All right, great. Yeah, so I want to share the 4 E's and highlight each one of these, where we see it in Scripture, what that looks like kind of in our current ministry context, in a planting situation, and what that can look like in some of the stories we're hearing of how that can look on an online ministry too. So I'm going to share a presentation with you guys. So all right, do you see the 4 planting essentials? Yes, is it full screen for you? Awesome. Okay, and you might want to like put your little kind of gallery of faces at the bottom instead of on the side, because there will be some things on the side and less on the bottom. But so the 4 planting essentials is really, it's not 4 steps. It's not just 1, 2, 3, 4. It is like a robust missiology for planting the way Jesus did, in the way that we saw the disciples plant with Jesus, and in Acts, and the way we see Paul plant across the Roman Empire. So the 4 E's that Sean highlighted already are encounter God, right? That the foundation for any missional work we do is that first we encounter God for ourselves, that our calling comes from a place of encounter, that if we want to help students have vision for planting in their corner or at another campus, that would need to start not by a vision cast from us, but by an encounter with God for themselves. And really that the foundation of our work, we are not purveyors of spiritual goods, we are facilitators of divine encounter. And that's really all we have to offer the campus and students and the world, is just a chance to encounter God for themselves. But for us as planters, this is our foundation, that we encounter God for ourselves. From that place of encounter, we explore for people of peace. And again, there's something beautiful and simple about that focus, that we're not trying to even meet every person or just endlessly add 1 + 1 + 1 student, but there's a kind of student who has a calling from Jesus, who has a network of people that they're connected to, that is receptive to you and to the message of the gospel, who responds with action. And we're looking for people like that. And through them, that we can empower them to reach their network and see the whole campus reached that way. So as we explore for people of peace, when we find them, we empower them. And really at the heart of our ministry is empowering people to reach their networks. And there's something beautiful in the ways where we're experiencing our displacement from campus right now, that our job still is about empowering students to love the people around them. Even if the people around them has changed and their context has changed, our call to encounter God, to help them encounter God, and to empower them as leaders in their context, as followers of Jesus in their context, is the same calling. So as we empower leaders to reach more networks on campus and more campuses, we need some rhythms and some structures to facilitate ongoing growth and to keep communities still connected as we start things even in decentralized ways. So establishing communal rhythms is that last one. And I want to highlight that I think for some of us, planting feels like establish structures, establish communal rhythms. Like that's the work of planting, is to establish something. And really it's not. Our work as planters is to encounter Jesus, find people of peace, and empower them to reach their networks. And structures can serve that happening well, but structures isn't the goal. Empowered people who are encountering God and helping their networks encounter God, that's the goal of planting. So I want to give one example of how we see this in Scripture. So Acts 16 gives us like a shining example of all 4 of these. This is Paul and his friends planting a church in Philippi. And it begins with an encounter with God. So they are continually encountering God as a community as they walk across the Roman Empire, and they're looking for the place where God is calling them. So as they continually encounter the Spirit, they've been forbidden by the Spirit to speak the word in Asia. And then it says, during the night, Paul had a vision, and there stood a man of Macedonia, pleading with him and saying, come over to Macedonia and help us. So that launched them in their planting journey towards Philippi, that they had an encounter with Jesus where he clearly called them to go to Macedonia. So when they get to Macedonia, they strategically identify Philippi as a place to plant and to begin exploring. And as soon as they get to town, that's what they do. They start to explore. So they presumably look for a synagogue and find that there is no synagogue in Philippi. That was like their normal first step of exploration, was let's find some people of God and tell them about Jesus. And here there's no synagogue, so they make another strategic decision to go find a place of prayer by a river. It says, on the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate by the river where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had gathered there. So in their exploration, they find a group of women, they share the gospel, and they find Lydia to be a person of peace, that she's receptive to the message, that she opens up her network, her household, and she responds with action right away. So Lydia actually is empowered as like ground zero for this whole community and movement that's starting. So it says Lydia and her household were baptized, and she urged us, saying, if you've judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home. So we see her empowered within her network. So her whole household is baptized, and a church is formed in her home. So the established piece, we see what happens throughout the rest of Acts 16. And when Paul and his friends are leaving Philippi, it says they went out from prison and visited Lydia. And when they had seen the brothers and sisters, they encouraged them and departed. So there's some kind of communal rhythm of gathering at Lydia's house. There's some kind of communal rhythm of a structure where people in this broad community of new followers of Jesus are gathering in a person's home to continue to encounter him in some way. So this is one example, but really we see this all over the Gospels and Acts. So this is what Jesus tells his disciples to do in Luke 9. It's what he tells the 72 to do in Luke 10, to go and explore for people of peace, to from that place to reach a whole network there. And we see it again and again and again. Anytime that Jesus interacts with somebody and then their whole household is impacted by that, we see this strategy working out. In Acts, we see this is what Peter does with Cornelius. It starts with an encounter on a rooftop. He goes and finds Cornelius, finds him to be a person of peace who's receptive. We see his whole household encounter God and get empowered with Peter's teaching, empowered with the Holy Spirit. And then we see this community being formed there. So I want to break down these 4 E's a little bit, and I would love some interaction as we go. So as we can learn from each other of ways we're trying to practice these 4 E's and where you're seeing it in your existing ministry. But encounter, as the first one, is just that we assume God is already moving, and that any work of planting doesn't begin with us going and kind of planting our flag, or even going with us going and proclaiming the gospel. It starts with us needing to have calling from Jesus to plant there. So Acts 16 is highlighted again as a core example of this. And one of our core practices for encountering God as planters is prayer walking, that we go and prayer walk on a campus and we encounter God there. But it doesn't just have to be encounter or in planting situations. Really helping students encounter God is the foundation of our ministry. So what are some of the other ways that you've helped students encounter God, or that you've prioritized encounter with God, even in this season of COVID-19 and everything? So yeah, any stories or just examples of things that are core practices in your ministry to encounter God for yourself and to help students encounter God?
Yeah, Eric, one example is just last night I was on a video call with a couple of student leaders in West Virginia, and we were studying the story of the 5,000, feeding the 5,000. And there was a moment where they were just recognizing that Jesus was being a shepherd to this whole crowd, but also to the disciples, and that he was putting the disciples in kind of an impossible situation to feed 5,000 people with resources they didn't have. But the reason was that he was trying to help these disciples become shepherds themselves. And there was a moment in that discussion where somebody just said, maybe that's what God has been doing with us as leaders this year. He's been helping us to become shepherds of his people. And that just felt like a holy moment. and they really sense God was speaking to them through the passage. So I would definitely call that an encounter with God.
Yeah, awesome. And just a great example of that being the goal of everything we do, right? That the goal of Bible study isn't just to run a great Bible study or help people learn some new things. It's that people would leave feeling like, I have encountered Jesus. Like I've heard from God and he's called me into something because of this. So that's of course what we do on campus with students in person. We want to help them encounter God in prayer meetings, in Bible studies, in prayer walks. We want to help students encounter Jesus. And really in online ministry, it's the same. Again, a typical example of helping people encounter God and encountering Jesus for ourselves would be prayer walking at a new campus, praying with students to facilitate times of encounter with God. But in online ministry, that might be together praying over a map of the campus. It might be and praying for the different people groups represented there or different departments that are continuing to have online classes. It might be facilitating a prayer meeting with students over Zoom. So there's a lot of resources and stories about this. One of the favorite ones I've heard recently was from Alex Kelly in Kentucky, who shared that he was leading a prayer meeting with a group of students. And at the end of it was a Bible study. At the end of the Bible study, offered to pray for students and asked if anyone had any prayer requests. And this is a group of students who mostly had a kind of a background with Jesus and, kind of had some of the knowledge, but maybe lacked a little of that kind of personal experience with God. And there was a student who shared that he had recently broken his tailbone. And just kind of like, oh, we're asking for prayer requests. Let me share. My tailbone hurts. Like I broke my tailbone. And didn't expect them to really pray for it right there. And Alex asked another student, would you pray for God to heal this student's tailbone? And it's a Zoom call, right? And the student he asked was like, I don't know about that. Like praying for healing over a Zoom call, like that seems like a really big deal. Maybe he should go to a doctor. And, was encouraged to actually go to a doctor, like, yes. But Alex was like, well, I at least want to take a second to try and pray and see if God would really do something. And he prayed for this student's tailbone and then afterwards asked how he was feeling. And the student was in shock. He was just like, wait, well, he wasn't muted. So even in the prayer team, he's like, what the heck? Like, are you kidding me? Like, what? No, like, no. And so then he gets up and is like walking around and testing it. And God healed the student's broken tailbone. And then everyone else on the call is having this moment of awe of like, God is here inhabiting the pixels and internets. And though we're spread out across the state, we have encountered the power of God for healing right now. And students were challenged to see Jesus more in bigger ways than they had before. They were kind of shaken outside of their complacency of who Jesus was from a powerful encounter with Jesus, where he was not at all limited by this separation and being online. So in online ministry, we still encounter Jesus. So explore. This is one where I think we experience a little more of the limitation of distance and of not being on a campus. When we explore for people of peace, like the Luke 10 example is go to a town, proclaim the peace of God, and if a person of peace is there, they'll welcome you. But how do we look for who's welcoming to us, who's showing us hospitality, who seems open when we can't even go to any of these places? So one of our typical core practices is network mapping, right? Helping students identify who the people of peace are in their networks, doing things like the 5T surveys around campus. This is a picture of Janaba and Wylisha at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And when I first met them, probably almost 10 years ago, they just immediately shared, it was at one of their churches, and they'd heard about InterVarsity, and they said that there was nothing like this where their friends could encounter Jesus for themselves and be growing in their faith. And for me, I was in a mode of everywhere I go, we're looking for people of peace. So even though I'm not on campus, I'm at church, I meet these students expressing this desire to reach their friends. And it's very clear, here is a person of peace. So we sat down that week and did a network map. And they had over 100 students on their network map, and from all different networks, from their dorm, from fraternities and sororities, from sports teams, from the multicultural office. And within that, they could identify some other people of peace to reach in those places, those networks. So that's like the classic, like we go and search for these people, and then we help them find people that they could search for as well. But an online ministry, that's more of a challenge. So I wonder, even before I share a couple stories there, like, does anyone have any ideas of ways you've continued to explore for people of peace, and ways you've continued to help students explore their networks, even as we've been separated and online in our ministry? So does anyone have or kind of a way you've wrestled with that? It doesn't have to be like a kind of a, all-star success story or something like that, but. Yeah, Amy, any ways you've seen that still happening in Minneapolis with students and staff?
Yeah, one of the fun things, we have a relatively young BCN chapter plant at the University of Minnesota. And I was talking with one of the leaders, and she just nonchalantly said, yeah, I mean, like, I invited some of my friends because they're just like at home and bored. And I was like, so these friends don't go to the U of M? She's like, no, they're just bored. So I said, well, thank you for inviting them, because actually if you invite them, they might get a vision for BCM on their campus and be able to start something. And she just hadn't thought of it. And so it was fun to kind of watch her get excited about, oh my gosh, my invitation, just because my friends are bored, actually could help. She was the planter for BCM at this campus and could actually help my friends plant the same thing. So that was a way where she couldn't have done that in real life with the BCM meetings, because they meet in person, parking's expensive. It's a way higher threshold to get them there. But with the online capacity, people of peace expanding out to other campuses. So.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest opportunities right now, is just that I think our students and ourselves, we can still get stuck in like a bounded mentality of my campus and, my people I'm connected with from the school I'm from, and helping people lift their eyes to see that there are literally no boundaries anymore. And to invite friends from other campuses where there's no intervarsity ministry is like one of the best opportunities I think that we have. And for them to have community in their own isolation and have a chance to encounter Jesus and hear what encouragement he would give for them in the midst of the kind of national stress and anxiety that we're going through, serves those students. And if they would have an encounter with Jesus there, that they could be sent back to their campuses, or even before campuses are reopened, if they're ever reopened, that they could even begin something, right then, to start a similar online group with their friends from their campus to process that anxiety and experience some community. So a really similar story, again, with Alex Kelly. Wasn't trying to highlight him so specifically today, but he's just got some great stories. And I talked to him last week, and he shared about a student who invited a friend from high school from another campus that the university was not present at, and a friend from high school. And that student had a powerful encounter with God in Scripture, and they did a call at the end of the Bible study. Is there anyone who is a point where they want to follow Jesus? And are there Christians in this call who want to take a step to share their faith on their campus and with their network of friends? And this student responded to that second one. They're like, oh, I really need to reach my friends on campus, and I think God is calling me to step out and be more bold with my faith. So she was from Transylvania University, which is not in Transylvania, it's in Kentucky. And so Alex met with her afterwards to offer some coaching of ways for her to reach out to students on her campus even before their campus will be back open. So that's great chapter planting work. And all that is helping students explore their networks for friends who are not yet connected to something and to other campuses. And then that's empowering that student to reach their network, which gets us into the next E of empower. So Mark 3 is the calling of the 12, and we see that this is all about Jesus calling a community of people to be with him, like literally daily encountering him, being in his presence, and then be sent out with power to heal and preach and cast out demons, that they're literally empowered by Jesus to go and do the ministry that he's modeling for them. So one of our core practices is discipleship cycles or coaching circles, and anything that we could do to help develop students with the skills that they would need to go and reach their networks. But also the kind of holistic empowerment of pastorally caring for these students, of finding out what needs they have and ways we can serve them, that every investment we make in them is about empowering and equipping them to go and follow Jesus and to reach their friends in their network. So a similar question. Any examples of how you've continued to empower students, or any stories of a time when a student really felt like they were continuing to be empowered or equipped or resourced for planting work and to reach their networks in any of your contexts? Yeah, Michael, any stories of how you've continued to empower students, or way you've seen students continue to empower their friends or students that they're discipling?
Yeah, I have one example. I was talking to one of my student leaders yesterday, and she was sharing this story with me about a student that we have. We call apprentices, the people that we were trying to train to become their own small group leader. And she was sharing, oh yeah, I've been kind of struggling with going through some discipleship cycles. I don't know how well he's been responding. He's been kind of like given this new season of being in pandemic. It's kind of hard to follow up and challenge and, kind of get good feedback. But then earlier last week, she had texted a whole bunch of people, checking in on them, saying how they were doing. And then we had done the math when we were talking to each other, that just an hour later, the apprentice that she had texted to check in had started texting and checking in on other people. One of them being me. He had texted me seeing how I was doing. I was like, oh, see, like even leading by example, you're leading him through a discipleship cycle of loving on the people around them. And so I was just a really cool sight to see that she was like, she wasn't sure about how she has been leading him, but the way that she's lived life and loved people around her, he's been catching on to that. And that's been his discipleship cycle, being discipled by Jesus and through her.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That is a beautiful example of just how that student was empowered to love the people around them. Yeah, and I think that is like a great picture of just the kind of empowerment that students need right now. Just that, like how powerful it is to have somebody show care and concern for you in the midst of crisis and isolation and fear and anxiety. That this student leader checked in with this other student and modeled that, and that he's got to see something different than the world around him that's isolating or escaping or whatever else. And that out of seeing that powerful picture, that he would choose to like, who else can I care about and check in on? And let me check in with my staff, and let me check in with these other people. If we could empower all of the students in our city to have that concern and care for the people around them, we would be mobilizing a force to model the love of God for the whole world. So yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, that really a similar example of one I have here is just this with the new Encounters with Jesus series that are really formed around addressing some of the challenges of our context right now, in anxiety and issues with family and displacement and isolation. Even inviting students from a different campus or a student leader to like do even a one-on-one encounter with Jesus with you, to see if they would recognize God's care for them and have an encounter with Jesus, and to pivot from there to cast vision for like, is this an already made tool that you could take and offer a similar space to any of your friends who are in need of community or who are struggling with anxiety and would want some kind of connection with you and with God through this. Again, modeling that, empowering them with that care for them, but then putting a tool in their hands to turn around and go do something like that within their network. So lastly, before we get to some kind of brainstorming together, is just that establishing communal rhythms, establishing structures, again, is not the goal, but it's something that we do to continue to build momentum and to continue to help students encounter Jesus, to continue to help students grow as leaders. But we really emphasize like discerning the design, that there's not just a list of here's the 3 structures that everyone needs, so go and do it exactly this way. But in Acts 2, we see a variety of structures happening, that there's people meeting in homes, there's places where the apostles are teaching, there's a space for miraculous ministry, there's outreach to neighbors, there's a lot of different structures happening, but there is a consistency and a rhythm to it, that when people join that community, they know what they're plugging into. And this has been a place where I think staff have functioned as the primary architects of chapters, and that we really can move towards helping students be the ones to really discern the design with us and identify what structures really serve their growth, what structures really serve their sending to campus and to their networks, and even cutting structures that don't serve those things. So my example from starting a ministry with Karen students from Myanmar who are in Omaha, and the structures that they formed didn't look like every other chapter here. It was a a communal meal with a time of worship. And there would be siblings and non-students, and our whole family and our kids were a part of that. It didn't really look like anything else we were doing, but it was a structure that made a ton of sense for them, and a space to involve their families, a space to be a part of our family, that food was central and that everyone brought something. And then there were different Bible studies based on if it was just in Korean or if it was in Korean and English. And then there was space to train apprentices. So there were several structures that got started. But what it was that we established, I think we had a concept in our mind of what would be a good idea. But really the felt need they had for a space for community and family and food was what that was the structure that they voiced would really meet their needs in that season. So online ministry, again, we've got some great resources just on the online ministry page of how to do each different structure online. And continue to be encouraged that all of these structures can happen online, but that the focus of those structures are to help students continue to encounter God and to empower them to continue to reach their networks. So I'm going to send it back to Sean and get some kind of reaction about this and do some brainstorming for how to continue applying these missiological principles in our context that we're in right now.
Yeah. Okay. So since there are 8 of us on this call right now, I'm going to try something, and that is to send us into breakout rooms in pairs. And so our first step will just be I'll assign a pair to each word, and so then. Like to have you just take a sort of a jump start on one of the words, one of the E's, and think specifically about what ideas or options you can think of for approaching that particular thing in an online method. So if it's Encounter, then what are some new ideas or even good ideas you've seen practiced already for encountering God online? And you just get us started, and then we'll come back together, share what we came up with, and try to add to that list in each of those areas. Okay, so so now that we have some ideas brainstormed, really this is just a starting point, right? Like we only have a few ideas in each category, but I think the real value of this, I hope the value of this will be that you just copy these tables and put them in your own Google Docs in the future, because you can just use these as a starting point to brainstorm with your team, with your area team, maybe your colleagues on staff, and say, let's try to brainstorm these ideas together. But maybe most importantly, the students that you're working with, and see what ideas they come up with in terms of ways to encounter, explore, empower, and establish rhythms online. So our expectation wasn't that we ourselves would generate all the best, amazing ideas together right here in our time frame, but that we would just practice it a little bit so that you would have an example of how to brainstorm with people in the future. Make sense? And speaking of that, we will share the slides that Eric went over in the beginning, so that you can use those if you want to in just sharing what the 4 E's are, that framework.
Yeah, I'll put a link where Mindy, in this table where Mindy says additional resources, I'll post a link to this also, and it's on Canva, so you can work through the presentation yourself or share it with other people too.
Great. And Eric started off by saying that it's a missional, or it's a missiology, right? It's a framework to think about our ministry and our mission and how we equip one another and how we just go about ministry. So if you think about it in those terms, you can sort of 4E just about anything that you do in ministry. In other words, what I'm saying is, anytime you get together with students online, as you're planning that get together, as you're planning that meeting, you could use the 4Es as your framework for how you plan it. So it's like, I want to make sure that we encounter God in some way while we're together, right? And so that gives you that category to work, to plan with. And then you could say, and I want to make sure we're exploring somehow how we could expand this missional group, or we can connect with more people outside of this circle that we have created. So you could try to think of like, what will we do in order to explore further? And or at least invite more people into what we're doing. And same thing, how will I empower those who join this call? How can I find a way to empower them to either take what we just did and replicate it somewhere else, or just practice maybe a skill that we talked about. Maybe it is listening prayer, and it's just like, how will I empower people to continue doing that practice, right? So, and then finally, the established piece is like, you will discern together. Are we doing this again, or should we change the way we do this? And is there something? Usually, if you debrief at the end of an online gathering, you make those kind of established decisions together, where it's like, what did you like about today's gathering, and what should we keep doing, and what would you like to change? I think if you end every online gathering with those two questions, you're inviting people to shape the rhythm and shape the gathering for the future, and that's a really good thing. So I guess what I'm just encouraging is that you use the 4Es as a mindset, or as a framework that you think about ministry through, and it can impact anything that you lead. All right. So wrapping up, and thanks for hanging on there while we work through this, but just wanted to make sure that we had the resources for you. So I'll share my screen. Okay, here we go. So on our Google Doc here, there's this link for Encounters with Jesus. And if you click on that, that takes you to this sort of table of contents of 8 online Bible studies that we've created. And they're meant to be used online. They're designed that way, and they use Google Docs so that people can adapt them and change the questions, and so that you can use these and change these for whatever setting you're in. And we really encourage that. And so if you click on for example, this first one, Jesus and Our Worries, if you click on that link, it takes you to a Bible study. It takes you to a passage that we've picked. Just taking a minute to load there. And so there's a passage there, and then one of the steps is to just select parts that stand out to you after you've read through the passage together. Then you comment about it using just like, if you pick out something and then want to add a comment, so you just do that. And then there are some discussion questions. and 2 types of application questions. One is a spiritual invitation that talks about you and your relationship with God, and the other is a missional opportunity that helps people think about how this might impact other people in their life and what next steps they might be able to take. And then it always has a table at the end about what is God saying to you through the passage, and what action can you take in the coming week. So every one of these Bible studies has that kind of a format. And then if you click on the leader's notes, that gives you a separate document, and it just walks you through the process, kind of gives you a minute by minute plan for leading the online study, and gives you some tips and extra questions, and just some help as a leader. So all of that is included for each of these studies, and those are all available to use. So we're using those in different places all around the country now, and staff and students so far are finding those easy to use. So we're really happy for that. Any questions about that resource? No? Okay. So thanks for joining us, and we would love to help in any way. If you decide to use the Encounters with Jesus resource and you just like a little extra coaching, or even would like us to maybe lead you and some student leaders through one of the studies just to see how it works in an online situation, be happy to do that. But we just want to say thanks again for joining us, and hopefully you and your folks will continue to see God show up in your online ministry situations.